I always had this kind of deeper knowing of this energy beyond us and like this deeper, like greater cosmic or divine energy. But when you're little, you think you're just like playing and just like, connecting to these spaces.
Hi, everybody. This is Victoria Vesna, and you're listening to Vibrations Matter. I talk to artists, scientists, and everybody who's interested in light, sound, and frequencies. Join me. Hello, hello. Hi, Iman.
Hey.
Welcome. Thank you for doing this. It's been quite a journey. We've known each other now for how long has it been, actually? When did you get your MFA?
I received my MFA in 2022, but I started in 2019. Yeah.
So you hit the pandemic.
Yeah. I got here right before the pandemic.
Oh my goodness. Wow. What was that like? How did that feel as an experience after wanting to do it, deciding to do it, starting the program, and then boom?
I mean, it was weird. It was bizarre because yeah, uprooting my whole life and coming to LA and to be met with a pandemic. Um, I learned a lot about myself in those moments. Yeah, it was a very, very strange time, but I also took some time away from school. So um I needed that break, I think, because of just like jumping into, a graduate degree and the pacing of the program is so fast. And so yeah, I was kind of grateful that that was happening. So I was able to take a step back and kind of reevaluate like where I was coming from and, what I wanted to lend more of my focus to. So,
Well,
you
it actually was an opportunity for all of us to take a little step back. Some people couldn't handle being by themselves, and others, including me, kind of were happy to just take a little break. It was maybe a little too long, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I enjoyed the break away from like the world, kind of.
A lot of animals and the natural world too really enjoyed it. They were so
Yeah.
happy. They came back to life, and everything was starting to flourish again from the constant destruction of noise and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So take us back a little bit. So you came to LA from Atlanta, but if
Hmm.
you circle back all the way to your childhood in Atlanta and you how you started moving towards where you are. I'm always very curious about the journey and some of the pivotal moments of the light bulb moments like, I love this. I'm going to keep digging into this area, or an excitement about something that shifts your path. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think when I think about like my path that led me to Los Angeles specifically and to Art Sci, I think a lot about my former faculty from undergraduate, Craig Dondowski, and he actually works a lot with sound and vibration and frequency. And I mean, growing up in Georgia, it was like very different from Los Angeles in the sense that it's very lush. There's like nature. I mean, there's nature here too, but it's a different type of nature that I had to like become accustomed to here in Los Angeles. And, that leads into like this body of work that I'm focusing on now. But yeah, I mean, growing up there, I just spent most of my time outside and very shy, very like painfully shy. And so a lot of time like outside and, you know, thankfully, like we had like a really beautiful yard in the home that I grew up, and my mother had this like huge garden, like a rose garden and vegetable garden. And so I spent a lot of time in those spaces and like outside talking to trees and like talking to nature spirits because I wasn't talking to anyone else.
Wow, that's very beautiful. So you were actually from the very start just naturally connecting to an environment in a more kind of fluid way than to people.
Yes, definitely. I felt more at home with nature than I did connecting to people because I didn't have to like, worry about my impression or, pleasantries or anything like that. With nature, you can kind of just come as you are. And yeah, I think I always had this kind of deeper knowing of this energy beyond us and like this deeper, like greater cosmic or divine energy. But when you're little, you think you're just like playing and just like connecting to these spaces. And so all of my work, since, I like to joke that I've been doing art my whole life, but, also I've kind of been doing the same subject matter my whole life. Like I used to just draw nature scenes, like things about animals and like all of these like very lush environments. And so I basically been doing the same thing my whole life, but just these like getting more granular and um,
Mhm.
distilling, these like sensations of like how I encapsulate and like view the world. Um, and then it was in 2016, I believe, I went on a residency to Catalonia, Greece, with my mentor, Craig Nangalski. And he had us doing very weird experiments with this like radionic device,
Oh,
which is this device that used to actually be used in medicine to diagnose different types of illnesses, but it isn't powered by anything. It's not plugged into any electrical current. It's only powered by the intention and the energetics of the individual using it. And so I was like playing around with this device and I became like really interested. And he invited me just randomly because he thought I would be um, someone who was in tune with sensitive
I don't think it's
energy.
random. I don't think it's random.
Like you seem like someone who pays attention to like energy and subtle energies and who's like, very sensitive to those things. So I want to see like how you interact with this device. And he would bring me to his class and then eventually invited me to this residency. And so on this residency, he also introduced me to the work of Roy Ascott. And
Mhm.
became really obsessed with that and had begun thinking about graduate school and actually reached out to Roy and asking him about the program that he had in, I can't remember, but in the
Plymouth.
UK.
It's in Plymouth in the UK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Plymouth. And told me that they were actually discontinuing that program and then gonna open it up in some other,
In China.
yeah, in China. And so I was like searching for something similar, and that's when DMA popped up. And that's the beginning story of how I got to
That's
LA.
such an interesting lineage, actually, because Roy, as you know, was my teacher. And
Oh, mm,
that's probably where, like, as you searched, it somehow came to DMA.
mhm,
But one of the things that he gave as a gift to the world is to stop having any kind of spirituality as being this thing that academia was looking down on. He really wanted to uplift the unknown, something that you can't even describe in words, and even get it to the point of doctoral degrees where we were able to engage these ideas that are generally frowned on in academia because it's so reductionist and everything has to be proved materially.
right,
And he came in with this argument that you can talk about it even if you can't prove it, and you can create works even though you can't prove it. And it's marvelous, actually, that that's what prompted you to come
Mhm.
over to LA. Amazing.
Yeah, I think that's what I also resonated with because um I had been making work about the unseen, my whole artistic career and like finding the language to talk about these things where people weren't just like literally saying to me, "Oh, it's like fantasy or make believe." It's like, no, it's how I actually experience the world and how a lot of Black and Indigenous cultures express themselves through the world and how we understand the world. And so, um, yeah, to, I guess, like witness someone talk about art in that way, but also through an experiential way. And I wanted to, um, yeah, I desired to kind of like bring those different technologies into my work to be able to express the unseen and how can science and spirituality not be in antithesis or kind of butt heads against each other, but how can they also expand,
Mhm,
a deeper
mhm.
knowledge of both of those worlds. I don't I feel like science is a type of spirituality in itself.
Absolutely, and it tends to go into very kind of materialistic methodologies. And what's interesting about trying to engage it is that we provide almost like a front to scientists where they can't go or they don't have the proof because the existing methodologies don't work. And what you're talking about also reminds me of how Roy defined it as moist media. So he
Yeah.
really wanted to get out of even the and the idea of technology as meaning machines, but
Mhm.
technology is what indigenous peoples have done for many years, referring to that as technology. And this is what you totally were tapping into from childhood, right? You just were going straight into your ancestral DNA and the technologies that you inherited. So talk a little bit about that, about how you started really tapping deeper into it, and working with it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think yeah, moist media. I remember that phrase, and I think that's what I really like grabbed onto to talk about technology in this like non-static and very like linear way, but it can be kind of like all encompassing of nature and an environment. And I think when I started, really feeling this like movement in my work towards this idea of like what I like to call is like an ancestral technology,
Mhm, mhm.
is when I was brought into the practice of Ifa, which is this Yoruba, Nigerian African practice, like a traditional African spirituality, which has everything to do with first like venerating your ancestors. So, one of the larger tenets or missions of that practice is to go back into your family tree as far back as possible. Um, and honoring the ancestors because of where what they did, you are here now. Um, and also part of that practice is like honoring the energies of nature. Like so many of the all of the deities, or what they would call Orisha, are assigned to like these different parts of nature, like the rivers, the wind, lightning, even the herbs and the plants themselves. And so I found it felt like I was like coming home when I with that spirituality found me. And it just felt very natural to like drop into that space and to um, further interact with nature in this way and it be animated and it respond to you and you being able to kind of communicate with it and create this like symbiotic relationship through nature and through that with your ancestors and also like with yourself. And so I think, yeah, being in that practice for so long, and now it's been like, over 10 years.
Mm.
Um, and it's like an even deeper part of my, I mean, I don't like to even say my artistic practice because my artistic practice isn't separate from my
Right.
life. It's like all encompassing. It's one
Yeah.
and the same. And so, yeah, I think that definitely informs my work and like even um the like action of building altars. Like I've always loved making these kind of like reverent spaces.
Mhm.
But really all of my work is some kind of altar in a
Alter.
sense. Might not look like a traditional altar, but thinking about how all of the elements are present within a space, like
Mhm.
water, air, fire, earth, and ether, and having all of those things activated towards the senses, and then bringing yourself and bringing your own energy into this like auric field and auric space, and kind of like offering over your energy to this place. Um, and it all kind of just like melding together and responding to each other. And then being able to take that away with you, like out into the world. And so thinking a lot about like, we think about spirituality as of like having to be in this like certain place and time, but really I'm trying to transcend that and think about like how can spirituality and religion, it can just, it can be a place in a church, in a building, but it can also be in your living room, but it really is like in yourself, and your spiritual practice moves out into the world and how you encounter people. So it's all like trying to get people to be more present and mindful of what a space offers and what they bring to a space and what you also take away from these environments and nature, and take with you and share with other people and your collective.
It's really the interactions, isn't it? And the interrelationship. You reminded me when we talked while you were working on developing your projects, and you mentioned Ifa, and I had at some point early on in the 80s actually encountered Santeria, which of course is based on the Ifa. But what I found fascinating and I related to your work is that Santeria practitioners actually took the original African deities and made fronts. And these fronts were based on Catholic imagery, so
Mm.
that the people who were imposing, the colonialists who were imposing Catholicism, were kind of tricked, for lack of a better word. But what they did in the process is they created this incredibly rich kind of multicultural imagery. And it's very obvious in that example because it's you know, Cuban, it's uh African from Nigeria, right? And it's also got which also has its own culture. And it came together in this very rich, complex way, which fascinated me. What I see in your work is you're in a way doing the same thing, but through a more contemporary experience of where you are. You're in Los Angeles, you're in Atlanta, you're in America, and you're just making it so that when somebody walks in, they're not bombarded with imagery that links to some particular idea that can link to religion and immediately restrict the experience. It's much more fluid in the sense that exactly what you're talking about. It's about elements, and the elements are there no matter how you end up interpreting them.
Right.
So you ended up going to Jamaica, which
Yeah.
I encouraged, and I really wanted that for you. And it
Mhm.
was really amazing to me and gratifying to watch how much it blossomed everything that was there all along. And I really want you to share that with everybody because it's really the key to how you've matured as an artist with all your work that always was art, of course. But I think that experience and those travels really contributed to ripening your expression and your sense of self in this environment.
Yeah, I was actually back in Jamaica in January. I was there for a month, continuing this work, but also like discovering my grandmother's land. She has some land there that I wasn't aware of, and it's been like 2 years trying to figure out exactly where this land is and getting back to it. Um, but yeah, my initial trip or travels to Jamaica, and I think it was 2022. And yes, I was able to go through your encouragement and help. And that work was primarily about the Taino Maroon community in Accompong, Jamaica. And so their community that is I was really interested in understanding like what ancestral traditions still linger and they've been able to hold on to because they are more secluded from the larger cultural context of Jamaica. Like they have their own government, they have their own mayor, and every year they have this ancestral celebration to honor the founders of the town, but also their ancestors. And it's like a whole ritual. The whole event is a ritual, you know, for days leading up to the actual celebration. There are people flooding into the town and there's like music and sound. And you know, I went there not knowing anyone and
Mhm.
not knowing if even my Airbnb was a real Airbnb and if I was gonna have a place to stay. And like my mother had a friend of a friend of, you know, an alumni sister, and they connected me with one of their drivers, and
Wow.
he picked me up from the airport and like drove me 2 hours into the mountains, and then like, you know,
You
knocked on
just
the door.
trusted, you trusted that it along with
Yeah, had never been there before. I haven't been, you know, at that time I hadn't been back to Jamaica since I was like 5 years old. And so it was the first time I had gone back as
Yes,
an adult.
yes.
And, you know, he knocked on the door, made sure, you know, it was an actual place before he dropped me off. But yeah, left me there. And you know, I came to the place and I had, you know, a video equipment and sound equipment. And thinking I knew what I wanted to document, but I didn't want to just come and just land there and start filming people and asking questions. And so most of the time it was just getting to know people and understand
Mhm,
like
mhm,
their cosmology of thinking of the town and like the importance of like all of these um different rituals that take place in the city center and even the ritual objects. And you know, I left there, you know, I did take video, but it became, you know, very important to me, you know, what is shown and, you know, who's watching some of these rituals and in what
sure,
context.
sure, sure.
And so sound kind of became like the cornerstone of that
Mhm.
experience because even the landscape itself, just the way it was situated in this valley, it became almost its own like sound system. And like thinking about like the homemade sound systems of Jamaican culture and like how that is like such a large part of ancestral sound and just like memory that's being created through sound and like repetition and like echo and like call and response and like these oral transmissions that are taking place. And just even in the language and the way that people speak to each other, like
Mm.
hearing really thick patois. I don't even, I could only pick up on some of it because like my mother,
Really?
she was taught to, what she says in school, like they told her, she has to speak the King's English. And so like language, yeah, and like language being removed from
Yeah,
her, even in
yes.
her own country before she even arrived in America. And so, she didn't really speak a lot of patois. And so I had to just like surrender. Like there's a surrendering that happens, that you can't try to understand what is being said. You just kind of have to fall into your body to hear what is actually being told to you and being circled around you through sound and through language.
Mm.
And so like that was like a large part of it, but also, yeah, the space itself was a sound system, and because it created this very large echo. So leading up to the event, there were people coming in and like parties from like sun up to sundown. Like the music didn't stop, and just more people kept coming into the town,
Wow,
and the
wow,
music gets louder. And, we could walk out for miles. There was a trip that I took out into the bush that was like a 5 hour trek, to
wow.
and from and back. And you could still hear like the echoes of the sound. Um, and yeah, sound being a part of ritual, like there were so many songs that were sung by their ancestors. I found records of some of the songs that they were reciting, from like the 1800s. And so they had been able to like
Oh,
hold
wow.
on to that language and this way of transferring knowledge between, they're collapsing time in like real in real space. There's this collapsion of time that's happening between the past, the present, and the future, because it's all like done in this way of ritual. Um, and then also like finding these like ritual sculptural objects of the like bomb yards, that was what they would call them. And these like objects and being used for healing, and like ritual and sound was a part of like that whole transference. And the journeyman through sound would be able to like take information from other dimensions and bring it back to this space. So yeah, the whole thing, and even the way that people spoke about how they interacted with each other during the celebrations, like people would always, multiple people would say the same thing, like if they had a job, or if they had like their booth in a certain place, or if they came to a celebration before, like people from all over the world flew into this tiny town just for the celebration. um, and people would say, well, if I did this last year, and so I have to do it this same way again this year, because this is the way that the ancestors understand it. Or I came last year, and so I have to come back because my ancestors are expecting me. Um,
Mm.
and even people that prepared some of the ritual, like food and the ceremony, like those people are the people that do that for life. They only get replaced when one of them,
That's
transitions
wow.
into, yeah, becoming an ancestor, and then someone else takes their place. Um, so yeah, when I left there, I had this like, yes, there's visuality, but really so much of my experience depended on sound.
Mm.
And that's kind of what I wanted to bring back into um, the exhibition space with that work, and has, yeah, really transformed where my practice is now. Um, and I had my own sound practice before I came to the island, and that like involves like wearing or listening to binaurals and just like I like very like trance inducing sounds. But that's also part of like Ifa, and like there's
Yes, yes.
very yeah, that kind of like sound space to be able to turn off like the thinking mind and into like the
Mhm.
subconscious mind, and like repetition and droning out. And so it just really like you're kind of like in between worlds with sound. And so to experience that in my homeland was like really beautiful and something that I think will forever be a part of my work. Yeah.
So you'll be going back. Are you going to start commuting where you just from time to
Probably, yeah. Yeah, because now, I found my grandmother's land.
Oh, that's so
Um,
beautiful. I remember
yeah.
when we Zoomed while you were still there, and it was really wonderful to see you in that environment. You seemed so relaxed into it. That's the best way I could describe it, where you just kind of were feeling, even on Zoom, I could see you sitting there and just really feeling at home. And
Yeah.
it was a lovely thing to see because you talk about it and we have this exchange, but there's nothing like being in that space, right? And you're transferring that space also through smell, right? So the recent work you're showing is very much the smell became part of it too.
Mm.
Remember, I walked in and I thought, oh, there's something here. I can smell something. What's going on?
Mhm.
And it was the smell of soil or
Mm.
the earth or musty. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it completely made me aware of the environment in a very different way. So definitely sound and light and the images projected, but the smell kind of overwhelmed me in a way that almost I could say confused me because in those spaces, gallery spaces, it's mostly sterile as far as smell goes, unless somebody with a lot of perfume passes by. So talk a little bit about that because it's, I think, a very interesting dimension you bring into the white cube.
Mm. Yeah, so I began like experimenting with scent in 2019, actually, when I started this body of work titled New Air. And it's came from a poem. Like that was like the first kind of like seed for that work. And it was a piece of writing that basically I was talking about my homesickness and thinking about Atlanta in springtime because it's so a part of my embodied memory. Like there would be moments where I would still be in Atlanta, but it'd be a different time of year and like a certain way that like the light filtered through trees or something like that, it would trigger this like sensation of like deja vu, and I would be like transported to
Mm.
springtime because it was so visceral. Like springtime, if you've ever been to Georgia or like the South, it's like everything becomes alive. Like it's like everything just like is buzzing with this like yellow energy, like the pollen is insane. But like the sky is so blue. It's like this piercing, perfect blue, and like the shoots of the plants that are coming out, this like neon green, but also the smells. And that because like there's so much pollen, there's a specific tree. I think it's a dogwood tree, but
Ah, yes, it is. And it's bursting with life, right?
yeah, it's bursting with life, but it also has a very particular smell of like fish. Like the
Yes,
way that the pollen smells is fish, like um
that's right. And this is
yeah.
what confused me when I walked in. I don't know which one did you capture? Which ones and how do you capture them actually? How do
Yeah.
you distill these smells? This is this is like wait, I need to know this.
Right. Yeah. So I took this poem and because I have a friend who is a scent designer, her name is Ariana, and she does really beautiful like conceptual scent design. And so even just like thinking about scent is like I kind of like have that experience through her. Um And so I took this scent. It's my cat. I took this scent with me to the Institute of Art and Olfactory that's here in downtown Los Angeles. And they just had like an open studio. I don't know if they do it anymore, but at the time they allowed people to come in and like experiment with the
Yes.
scent. People who were like novice or beginner perfumers. And so I went there with this poem and, explained to the man there, like, I want to recreate Atlanta in the springtime. And these are kind of the smells I'm thinking about, the smell of like dry red clay and red earth. And when the rain finally hits the earth, that smell that
Yes.
released by the soil. Um, Thinking about like my mother's garden, and since she had like this really huge rose garden, like how it would smell after like during the summer, where the summer heat and it just gets so hot, and like this kind of like overbearing scent of decaying roses. But
Mhm.
also like how do you recreate this fish smell? And so yeah, the man looked at me like, I don't know about this. Like, I'm not wearing it. It's purely for like it's gonna be
He's like, you want to wear
yeah.
that?
It's like it's not meant to be, a nice smelling perfume. I'm okay if it doesn't smell particularly attractive. But also like in that scent, and how I kind of started thinking about this is like communicating with this landscape. How can I communicate with this landscape through the medium of air?
Mhm.
And yeah, and also communicating with the distant landscape of Jamaica, because to that point I had not gone back, and thinking about different parts of my genealogy, and which in my migration of like my mother's migration to the US, and then my migration to Los Angeles, and how these things are kind of tied together through air and through
Mhm.
ether. Um, and so, yeah, I'd also simultaneously was doing research on how plants communicate with each other. And they communicate by releasing, some plants do, through releasing this compound called methyl jasmonate in the air. And it's traveled through with the wind. And different plants pick up on these signals. And so I was able to also find the synthesized version of methyl jasmonate. And so combining like these different scents that I captured from the art at the Institute of Art and Olfactory with this methyl jasmonate compound. And I had also for that first for that first piece out of that body of work, asked my mother to like ship some soil from her garden. And so kind of trying to create this like outer body experience of like diffusing the methyl jasmonate and the scent, which I like put in this bioplastic, and it all kind of like interacting with like the soil and the earth of like the Georgia red clay, my mother's garden, and trying to elicit this like bodily memory to come forward for myself of Atlanta and springtime. Um, but yeah, in the gallery, there are those three scents that are still present. And so the scent of like wet earth, the fish scent, the closest thing we could like get to it was like the man, he was so helpful. He's like, maybe we can do like seaweed, like an ocean smell. And so like that's in the center vessel, if you see behind me, these like glass
Yeah.
vessels.
Yes.
Um, and then the third one is like the scent of like roses and earth. Um, yeah, so I
So,
wanted to create this kind of like triangulation of
mhm.
communication between these different landscapes, and the projection in the back is of Los Angeles. So there's like Atlanta, this ocean smell, and also like this fish smell. But then also the landscape of LA.
So what's interesting is that you're bringing together LA and Atlanta, and we should find this man who helped you and send him info or bring him into the installation so he sees what he contributed to. I
Uh,
think it's actually quite wonderful to have that kind of kindness and participation from people who are passionate about it.
I
I guess
forget
my
his
last,
name, yeah,
yeah,
but
well, let's
actually,
dig it out. Let's dig it.
yeah, he actually practiced Santeria, so I thought that was funny.
Oh, wow,
After
that's
like
amazing.
having a conversation with him, I realized he was
Well,
very
then we really need to track him down for sure. Um, Last question is, after the exhibition in Los Angeles, you'll be going to Atlanta and you have a one-person show there. And I immediately thought, okay, so you're bringing in the Georgia into this other environment and you're melding them and you're introducing us here in LA to this other smell, the other sounds, but you're bringing in the plants from where we are. How are people responding in Georgia? Because this is not very familiar to them, right? When I enter into your installation, I'm confronted with something very different as far as smell goes, and it makes my experience, like I said at one point, it confused me a little bit, and then I had to get used to it, and the imagery and the sound made me relax into it and understand it and appreciate it. But I'm wondering how it connects to, if you thought about it, or if you have expectations to the audiences in Georgia to whom these smells are actually very familiar, right?
yeah. So the project that I'm doing in Atlanta is a little bit different, and it
Oh, I
has
see. Okay.
it's focused on the herbal traditions of bush medicine within Jamaica, and so
Oh,
like the oral
wonderful.
history that's still very much like rooted in that culture, and how I'm really fascinated about how almost pretty much everyone can tell you about plant medicine. And it'll come up in the most random conversations. Like even little children, they know more about herbs and plants than I do. It
Amazing.
will tell you everything about it. And so yeah, that work is more about creating this like living archive of um really like herbal and medicinal sovereignty of the people of Jamaica, but kind of also talking about like the knowledge that is passed on through the land, through eating the herbs, consuming the herbs and tending and cultivating these herbs and these plants, and the things that get severed or cut off, through migration. My mother and my grandmother had a different, deeper understanding of this landscape than I did. I mean, my mother grew up in Kingston, so she grew up in the city. So, but my grandmother had like, a different relationship to the land. And, her mother and her mother's mother had this like deeper relationship with the land, and, what happens when people migrate or, forcibly or through choice.
Right.
And are severed from that body of knowledge. And even just like being able to consume those things, your body creates this other way of knowing and relationship to the land through consumption.
Mhm.
And it kind of like melding with your specific DNA, and like eating for your DNA, I think is like a real thing, and eating for your culture. I think so
Absolutely.
much of like how we eat now is like very homogenous, but I think more needs to be thought about, like, what did our ancestors actually consume? And,
Right.
maybe that's the best way that we should be consuming food or having a relationship towards food. And so, what happens when you're cut off and severed from that place? Um, but also this kind of communication that's happening through like touching and smelling and seeing and learning these different plants. Um,
So
and
the
so,
question,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but before I lose it, the question then arises in me, if you willfully or forcefully immigrate or migrate to a new place, and you have all this string of ancestry that the consumption of food and herbs is based on their local environment for generations and generations. And now you find yourself in a different environment. Your genetics are still in the ancestry, but
Yeah.
your environment also impacts your present state. So there's also that kind of mixing of understanding the ancestry and adjusting to this new almost hybrid way of relationship, which somehow really needs to be addressed more. If you're in a place where you can, for instance, in, it doesn't even matter where, but if you're in a place where you are forced to almost by the environment eat only meat, only a certain type of meat because that's the environment you're in, but then you're transplanted to a place where that is actually not available to you. Uh,
Mhm.
your genetics still are asking for the meat.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? And even if you're surrounded by vegans and there is no meat and you can't even buy it, so what then, right? I think this is the quandary that a lot of humanity is facing because we're mixing so much now. That's
Right.
unusual. It's not the way we grew as a humanity. So
Mhm.
there's no answer to this, but I think you're definitely addressing it in your work. And to bring in the herbs into it, I think is fantastic because you're sharing that knowledge to a larger group of people who may or may not share the same ancestry lineage, but would benefit from it or would benefit at least from understanding the importance of tapping into that.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a different encoding that happens for all of us from, depending on where our genealogy is connected to. And so for myself, I'm, a novice when it comes to herbalism, but, I did have some knowledge of the herbs and the plants in Atlanta and now trying to understand, what do I have that's available to me here in Los Angeles, but then thinking deeper is like, is that even really for me?
Right.
And so wanting to have a deeper understanding of what is my body going to recognize and, optimize in its like nurturing and healing capacity. And so I wanted to, I sought out these bush doctors and herbalists on
Oh,
the island and
wonderful.
had these conversations with them and came back with, I bought a whole separate luggage just for
Really?
all of the herbs and all of like the bitter
Wow.
tonics. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I wish I could see that. And you need to do a workshop for us. Absolutely. I mean, wherever you have your shows, it would be wonderful to also have some kind of teachings where you share that and you basically teach what you have learned and help people understand that they have in front of them also possibilities to self-heal and to, especially now with so much going on with our health system failing us and all
Right.
that's related to that. It's just so important to empower
Mhm.
others into this knowledge. So I really appreciate what you're doing and the path you're taking is really
Yeah.
great.
I
Thank you,
see it as
Emma.
like a form of like liberation, really.
Yes, that,
Because a lot of people, we're used to going to doctors, but
that's right.
most people in other places of the world, they never see a doctor and they still are able to heal their communities. And I think that needs to be highlighted more and brought to America, and part of like the common knowledge of like how can we heal each other and ourselves,
Right.
the
That's
land.
right. And
Yeah.
the one great thing about America is all the different types of knowledge and ancestral knowledge, and the different types of environments really allow for this kind of mixing to happen and sharing of knowledge, including incredible progress and technologies and medical technologies as well. So to create some kind of balance between all of this and empower people is just so important. I really appreciate the work you do, and I learned more. Even though we talk, we've known each other, it's always great to have these conversations that stray into different places, and I look forward to more, much
Yeah,
more. Okay.
this has been great, and I think the show, I learned a lot about my practice just in every time I put these elements together, something else, bubbles up, and I really appreciate you offering me the
Oh,
space to do this work and to be able to have these conversations and yeah, make connections with, a deeper community and yeah, create
absolutely.
these environments for other people to experience. So it's been really beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mhm.